Well, hi everybody. This is going to be very much different from the short stories that I usually write and post. I would like to call this just the argument. Uh, I'll bring it up again. It's been brought up so many times, but I think that, and I believe that by my argument, I can prove uh, once and for all that the southern states did have the right to secede from the Union back in 1860. Now, I actually started to write a book about this, and I have about 300 plus pages, but it's been on the back burner. So recently, with everything that goes on in this country right now, I mean, it is January 2026, and yeah, people are not happy. So, why not join it and ruffle some feathers? And so that is what I'm doing here. I would love to hear your comments. I may break this up into two different videos because the arguments itself, I have to lay a very solid foundation because that has a bearing on why I believe that the South could secede. So, um, first, it's my belief that war is its own master and serves no man. It is the extension of the breakdown of relations between men. In this work, I have used the most credible sources as a base: the National Archives, Library of Congress, U.S. Census, different United States official records. I also looked at the original newspapers, and newspapers give or take a little bit because they put their own angle based on their allegiance. I have used only original documents, Senate and House of Representatives journals, state government journals, books, and memoirs written by those who took part in the events. When questions arose where I could not find the answers, I contacted the agency that I thought would have the answers. Most of the time, I got the answers, but in one instance, uh, I asked, why is Kansas listed as a state in the 1860 United States Census when it did not become a state until 1861? While I was talking to the U.S. Census Bureau, I actually called them. They insisted that it was listed as a territory. This is not true. Um, just look it up yourself. Now, overall, maybe it captures the essence of sometimes shit happens, and you must accept that nobody knows the real answer for it. My belief is that the census was not completed until 1861, and therefore Kansas, by now a state in the Union, came to be listed as a state. All right, in order for everything to work, we must have the foundation laid. So, if we go back all the way to 1776, the year of the Declaration of Independence, now, United States looked very different back then. It actually took 12 years before the first Constitution of the United States was ratified, that means approved, and made the law of the land. That happened in 1788, much thanks to the so called Federalist Papers. Uh, they are extremely interesting to read, and they are written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Uh, they wrote them 87 and 88, and they were meant to convince New York to ratify the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation is basically the very first constitution. So, jumping forward a little bit, after the Revolutionary War, each of the 11 colonies sent a representative to the Continental Congress, and they met for the very first time in Philadelphia on September 5th, 1774. On June 15, 1775, George Washington was unanimously elected as general. There is only one short sentence in the journals that talk about this. There was no debate, other discussion, or anything else recorded. George Washington was, up until this point, a member of the Continental Congress as a representative for Virginia. After being elected general, he vacated his seat in Congress and he was replaced by Thomas Jefferson. Virginia was the first state to propose that the Continental Congress make a declaration that the United States were free and independent states and absolved from all allegiance to the Crown or Parliament of Great Britain. The motion passed on the second day of July 1776. So, actually, Independence Day is July 2nd. But Congress sat with closed doors all day and the report had to be acted on by the Committee of Declarations. This was done on the 4th of July. Thereby, 4th of July became our day of independence. What they had to make sure that they got done was the Articles of Confederation. It was brought up in Congress 1776, and they were finalized in 1778. It actually took 2 years to come up with the Articles of Confederation. That was the first constitution. It was an agreement between the states as to how a new nation should move forward. It was not a document that required the states to abide by its content, merely a suggestion, and the states could decide whether to follow it or not. And this is where it gets interesting. The second sentence in this document starts with the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Now, perpetual, according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of this word is everlasting, valid for all times. Now, this would indicate that a state would not have the right to secede, but in Article 2, it clearly shows that the states retain their independence in this perpetual union. So, Article number 2 says, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. So, Article 1 and Article 2 clearly states that the Union is forever, but its member states had the right to decide if they wanted to be part of this perpetual union or not, and therefore, later argued by the Southern states, the states also had the right to leave this perpetual union, meaning that the union was perpetual, but its member states were not perpetually bound to this union. Now we can draw a parallel between the United Nations today. Trump, for some time before he got elected the second time, actually talked about leaving the United Nations. Now, the UN is a perpetual organization. And yeah, for whatever it's worth. Now, back in those days, there were only two states that did not have slaves, and that's Maine and Massachusetts. We all know that. The reason that slaves were counted and important was that each slave counted for 3/5 of a white man when it came to the number of representatives in the House of Representatives. And I'm still struggling with that 3/5. Yeah, I gotta look at what the actual number is. So, and if we look at the U.S. Census, that back then it was not an official department. They had decided to hire a number of individuals to do the count, and when it was done, they were released from this duty. The job was not well paid. Surveys in cities and communities with 5,000 inhabitants or more paid $1 for every 300 people counted. In rural areas, $1 per every 150 people counted, and in the territories, $1 per every 50 people counted. Just something to interesting fact. Now, after the 1790 census, the people hired for the next survey was given a copy of the 1790 survey and had to get their own paper and do the best they could using the 1790 survey as a guide. Right. Chapter 2 of my argument. Now, the continent was divided into states and territories. In 1820, discussions ran high concerning territories being admitted as states and if they should be admitted into the Union as slave or free states. The Whig Party was very influential but divided. The Northern Whigs were mostly against. The Southern Whigs were mostly for slavery. The Whig Party was a remnant from the colonial days and stemmed from England. To understand why there was a conflict regarding these new states, we must look at the Congress in these still early times. The Southern states foresaw that if the new states were admitted as free states, a shift in the balance of Congress would sway toward the northern states getting a majority, and it would therefore have a negative impact on the South. A majority of the European immigrants landed in New York, and they settled in the northern states. Since the members of the House of Representatives is based on the state's population, where the immigrants settled was of great importance. To most European immigrants, the traditional slavery was a foreign concept, and they felt uncomfortable with slavery and most opposed it. The Republican Party capitalized on this, and as immigration grew, so did the Republican Party. The new states being admitted as slave or free state was important for both the northern and southern states, and did not really have anything to do with the question of slavery, or it had everything to do with it. It boiled down to politics and the state rights to govern themselves. They reached a compromise called the Missouri Compromise, where they decided that north of 36 latitude, 30 longitude were non-slave, or so-called free states, and south of this line, slave states. The compromise did not please North or South, but it stayed in effect for about 30 years. Now, as early as 1830, and this is important. The South Carolina Congress discussed problems with the United States government and how it affected South Carolina. The idea of leaving the Union was discussed mainly because of tariffs on trade. If we look at what brought that on, was the 1828 tariff. Now, this was a protective tariff, most of them are, in support of northern domestic business, meaning that there were tariffs within, so to speak, a country against certain parts of that country. That doesn't sound right. So, what happened was, and the way this was brought up, is that the southern states exported a lot of agricultural products, mostly cotton, to Europe. England was their largest customer, and they paid for part of the cotton with goods, so it was a trade. The 1828 tariff put a 38% tax on 92% of all imported goods, since northern businesses were driven out of business by low-priced imported goods. The southern states were affected, since they now had to pay higher prices for goods not produced in the south, and their trade with England was reduced. Now, this tariff, they also called it the Tariff of Abomination, passed the House of Representatives on April 22nd, 1828. And it led to a lot of problems. Politics back then was just as messy as they are today. I found some journals from the South Carolina Senate, their select committee, on December 3rd, 1830. And a person, his name was Mr. Seabrook. I don't know that much about him, but he was a member, and this is part of what he said. He said that the powers not delegated to the United States by Constitution or nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. This is a compact which Rutledge and Butler and the Pinckneys subscribed in behalf of the then free, sovereign, independent state of South Carolina. Whereas, in the opinion of this legislature, the Congress of the United States, on diverse occasions and on several important subjects, has assumed and exercised powers not granted in the Constitution of the United States, either directly or by any rational implication, be enacting laws both in relation to appropriation for roads and canals and in relations to imposts and duties on foreign importations for the purpose of encouraging and protecting domestic or American manufacturers, which law the legislature of the South Carolina has more than once pronounced to be unauthorized by the Constitution of the United States, and a direct infringement of those rights of self-government which legitimately belong to the said legislature, and which it alone should not exercise, or has also, on more occasions than one, attempted the exercise of other powers equally dangerous to the well-being of the said state. Now, the Constitution of the United States was ratified by South Carolina on May 23rd, 1788, and related to this South Carolina Convention, Mr. Seabrook continued in his argument. this convention does also declare that no section or paragraph of the said Constitution warrants a constriction that the states do not retain every power not expressly relinquished by them and vested in the general government of the Union. Now, Mr. Seabrook meant that the United States Congress had no right to tax the importation of goods in South Carolina, since it was not a power given to Congress in ratifying the Constitution. South Carolina ignored the tariff, and this led to a new tariff of 1833, known as a compromise tariff. This tariff was not what the southern states had agreed to in ratifying the Constitution and had little or no effect. In 1842, a new tariff was passed, and this reinstated protected tariffs, which are now in use all over the world to protect domestic manufacturing. By the 1850s, the political impact of immigration had reached new levels, and with California wanting to enter as a new free state in the Union, and that new areas like New Mexico and Utah territories have been added as a result of the Mexican War, South Carolina saw the shift in Congress, leaving a majority of the members as representatives of free states. The Compromise of 1850 was enacted in September of 1850, and by then the South Carolina Congress voted on secession from the Union. This was in 1850. It is fair to believe that this compromise led South Carolina not to act on the decision to secede until it became necessary. That was actually what they said. So, with this expansion to the west, settlers and Indians were increasingly at odds, and something needed to be done. A lot of people got killed, and they fought left and right. In 1854, Stephen Douglas introduced a bill to organize the Nebraska Territory. This was to bring law and order and control over this vast area, since a railroad connecting east and west was to be built. The Nebraska Territory covered what is today Nebraska, most of Montana, parts of Wyoming, North and South Dakota, and a small part of Colorado. So it was a very, very big area. Now, back to politics again. So tempers flared in Congress as this was discussed, since the territory encompassed both slave and free areas, according to the Missouri Compromise. There was at this time a demand for more land, and the Nebraska Territory was at the top of the list. Since the territory did not have official status, you could not own the land that you might have staked out. So it was important for them to get the territory a state status. Now, they reached another compromise. It was decided that the states north of the line had a choice, and it would be up to the citizens of this new state to decide whether or not the state would be a slave state or a free state. Nobody was satisfied with this, and a lot of things went down. We had the Lecompton Constitution, Kansas, lots of problems. But it kept on going, and the problems between the North and South Democrats were at an all-time high. And most Democrats from the North abandoned the party and went to the Republican Party. Now, the Republican Party was the Whig Party that just turned into the Republican Party, and that's actually also true for the Democrats. So the Southern Democrats were part of the Whig Party too, but they went different ways. Now, everything was accelerated by the animosity that was extended to any Democrat living in a northern state. Now, state loyalty was important, and in the North, the Republican Party had a large following, and they also had held majority in state governments. Northern Democrats were relatively few, but they differed from their southern counterparts in that they, for the most part, did not support slavery as an institution. They did support state rights, and they did believe that it was up to the states to decide whether or not slavery should be allowed. The Democratic Party was very big in the South, and all the way up to the 1860s, Republicans had a hard time getting any votes down there. For those that remained loyal to the Democratic Party while living in the northern states, life became very difficult. Uh, and that increased the more divided the country became. Just as a note, if you ever get a chance to go into PBS, there is a movie called Copperheads. It really describes this really well. Okay, so this is the first part of my argument. Whether I put in more or not, I don't know. It depends a little bit on the response I get. Uh, as you know, from this point, the stage was set. And as the North grew, with all the immigrants coming in and settling in the North, pretty soon the northern states had control of governing the United States. And it got really bad to the point where Nixon, where Lincoln was elected, and that kind of ignited the fuse, and the southern states started to secede from the Union. I truly believe that they had every right to do this, since the Union may be perpetual, but it does not say anything about its members. Splitting hairs, maybe. I don't know. Uh, well, let's continue this a little bit later. Let's see if I get any response to it. And have a good day. Bye.